And we are live. It is John Pollock, joined as always by Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. It is another edition of Pollock and Thurston Interview. Joining us
Yes.
today in the hot seat, a man that I'm sure many people that are interested in this subject matter very familiar with. A familiar voice on WWE earnings calls, a analyst at LightShed. It's a pleasure to welcome Brandon Ross to the program. Brandon, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us and taking some time to chat with us.
I'm good. It's great to be here, guys. TKO earnings calls now, right?
That is right.
It'll take about 9 months or so before that deal's closed, but it'll be a lot of fun to have these two companies together and get to look at these two businesses, the UFC business and the WWE business, under the same umbrella, at least for the analysts. I don't know about exactly what's going to happen in terms of the dynamics internally. We'll see as that unfolds.
Well, as you've had some time to digest this, Brandon, I mean, you had been one of the people at the forefront looking at this as Endeavor being a very logical option for a landing spot. But this is a lot of interesting personalities all under one roof. And, from a commercial standpoint, Vince McMahon, a Dana White, how have you sort of assessed just some of the dynamics that come with a merger like this and a lot of powerful figures that have typically run their companies, and now you are working in concert with one another?
Great opportunity for shoulder content. That's what I know. I think honestly, these two businesses will probably, while they're under the same umbrella, and they'll have the ability to share some costs and do some cross promotion and kind of take the expertise out of each other's businesses. They'll probably be run pretty separately. I mean, you already see the management structure where Nick is going to run WWE, Dana is going to run UFC. I expect those to be pretty siloed fiefdoms where most of the crossover it happens through strategic meetings.
Yeah, and this transaction, which you correctly predicted, by the way, we talked to you several months ago, and you were talking, basically the only one talking at that point, about the notion that Endeavor could acquire or merge with WWE. And you had talked about a reverse Morris trust.
Yeah.
And I was listening to your latest podcast last Friday, and this is actually not a reverse Morris trust. Is that
No,
right?
this isn't. So the way a reverse Morris trust would have worked would have been that the shareholders of Endeavor would have gotten ownership in the new entity, and it would have been a completely separate company with no Endeavor ownership. What I missed about the possibility for that transaction was Endeavor would have had to own 80% of UFC for at least 6 years, I think, and they didn't. So they couldn't do it under that structure. So under the current structure of the deal, Endeavor owns 51% of TKO, and that's Endeavor, the company, not the shareholders of Endeavor.
And
so it's different.
And one thing I'm trying to figure out lately is that I take it that all W shares, when this is complete, all W shares are going to become TKO shares.
That's correct. Yep.
That'll be 49% of the stock. 51% is going to be owned by EDR, but does Endeavor shareholders get TKO shares, or is it just Endeavor is going to be owning majority equity?
That's right. That's under a reverse Morris trust. What you said previously, Endeavor shareholders owning it would have been the case, but it's actually Endeavor, the corporate entity.
Yeah, and how does that work for control? I guess who controls that 51% equity that Endeavor owns? Is it just Ari or whoever the CEO is? I guess when it comes to a board
ultimately
vote.
The shareholders of the board of, like in air quotes, but ultimately it's Ari's game. I mean, he's the leader of that organization.
Yeah.
How pivotal was Vince McMahon in all of these talks, from your understanding, Brandon, and sort of the appetite that was out there of not just getting into business with WWE, but primarily having Vince McMahon as a focal point in the next iteration of this company?
Sure. I saw what you guys saw, right? Which was Ari, who definitely has a very long-standing relationship with Vince McMahon. He said that he wanted Vince involved and asked specifically for him to be involved. The party line is that this wasn't a requirement from Vince. Whether or not we should believe that or not, I honestly don't know. I don't want to make a judgment call either way, but kind of entering the mind of somebody, any business owner, especially one with a very type A personality whose entire identity and life has been wrapped around one single company or product, is probably going to want to force his way into continuing that involvement. Yeah. And as chairman of TKO, he actually, is in a power position in a bigger organization than he was before.
And he won't have special voting rights in this case. But reading the filings that came out last week, Monday, it sounds like this is going to be a one-class shareholder system.
Yeah, that's how I read it as well, Brandon.
Yeah. So it's not going to be the case now where he has about a little over a third of the stock, but 81% of the votes. He's going to have, by my math, about 18% of the control. And
that's correct. It remains to be seen, obviously, how much ultimate control he's able to wrestle, whether it's from a creative standpoint or a business standpoint. And that remains to be seen. It seems like Ari will likely give him as much leeway as he wants. And I don't know, you guys are more equipped to tell me, how do you think that Vince's imprint has been on maybe the end of WrestleMania or the subsequent shows? Or do you think
he was definitely there the Monday after?
No, I know. I know he was there, but was his imprint on the creative is what I'm asking you guys.
Oh, on that Monday show after WrestleMania, like that was a Vince McMahon show. And and subsequent shows, I mean, last Friday's show, this past Monday, Vince McMahon was not there presently, but it's ultimately it's no longer this idea that it is church and state where Vince is working on a sale and has nothing to do with creative. Oh. It is public. It's like the public line is that, yes, I am involved, but I'm not in the weeds. So, I mean, that is, working with Paul Levesque at the very least. And there's going to be that influence. And I think that's
the big picture influence,
the big picture storyline. And that will permeate, I think, into like certainly having more of a hands-on approach than the last couple of months. But I certainly feel like there's going to be that specter of Vince with the creative direction of this.
Yeah. And to be clear on like what's been reported, right after he retired or resigned, he was apparently not involved. I mean, Paul Levesque and Vince are probably having conversations, and who knows what kind of influence he's exerting through that. But when he came back to the company in January, I mean, we had Paul Levesque make comments on the earnings call about, how beneficial it is to have him back as executive chairman. And obviously he was there in LA during WrestleMania week, and he was there at the arena he was in Gorilla. He was in the backstage.
No, I know he was in Gorilla. And no one could miss him.
Yes. No, he's put a giant bullseye on his face for everybody to see. And it does become very interesting, Brandon, because I mean, just listening to like the earnings calls, and this is the first time I've had a chance to speak with you. Like, you certainly seem to be very engaged with sort of like the news cycle of professional wrestling, and that seems to be something Brandon and I have noticed is that a lot of analysts, like they might not be watching the weekly programming, but they certainly seem to have a better read of the fans' perception of the on-screen product. And if you're Paul Levesque, you can certainly lean back on metrics that have improved under this 9-10 month run where he has, been leading the creative direction. This is not just, fan sentiment, but
first of all, the numbers speak for themselves.
That's it.
Second of all, I think any analyst who's doing their job speaks to the customers of the product that they're analyzing. And in, customer conversations, Mark on our team is a huge wrestling fan. I actually thought about bringing him on this podcast with me, and I think both of you should meet him. So he is, he's really on the beat of what's happening creatively. Obviously, I watch here and there, not to the same obsessive
You were at WrestleMania, right?
extent of, yeah, I was only there the first night, but I did watch the second night on Peacock, and I'll tell you why. I thought the content was awesome.
Night one
Um,
especially was very good.
yeah, I was more into it, and obviously I'm much more casually involved with the content than you guys are, but I was more into that night one of WrestleMania than any of the previous shows that I've attended live.
I think
I
that's
thought
a
it was
pretty
great.
universal opinion, especially of that
Okay,
first night
yeah.
show. Like, this was a pretty well received WrestleMania by anyone's standards. I think it was a very, very well received show, and it was also, I mean, their most financially rewarding WrestleMania as well. You had the opportunity to speak with Nick Khan last week following the announcement of the merger. And I kind of want to go back and just some of your impressions when Nick Khan made this giant pivot in his career going to WWE in 2020. And how much did that catch the industry off guard? And what kind of a hiring this is for WWE in terms of just the importance that Nick has brought to this company in terms of not just business dealings, but I think perception-wise as well. It certainly has been a very important 3-year period, and he's been at the forefront of it.
Sure. I think, first of all, I think George and Michelle actually did a great job in evolving WWE. It's brand, not only I don't mean it's brand with wrestling fans, but it's the industry perception of WWE. I think the move into streaming at the time looked like it was some really forward-thinking stuff. And there was a lot of respect that others in the media industry, other companies, gave to WWE for that move.
I had not started covering WWE before the network launch. Like, how much were TMT analysts like really covering WWE before the network? Was the network launch a big change for that?
Yeah, that was. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the network itself, but it was their ability to get to 1 million over-the-top subscribers at the real beginning of OTT. I mean, there were very few companies at that time who could boast that. It was Netflix. It was Amazon Prime. I mean, which both have broad content. I don't even think Crunchyroll had gotten to 1 million yet, if you want to go back to like sort of single product OTTs. And I think MLB did. MLB.TV.
Because UFC Fight Pass around that time too, right?
Yeah, but it was later, I think, and it never got to, it was a pretty revolutionary idea to cut the middleman out at that time. And obviously George and Michelle had a huge hand in that evolution and taking that risk. You have to give Vince credit. I mean, ultimately Vince controls everything, and he was, willing to, or not just willing to, he really embraced that step. And I think that was an important shift in perception around WWE as a business. Obviously, others caught up in the OTT world. And then in that next iteration, it made sense to, and I was unsure about this at the time, but it's worked out. It made sense to license that content out to a third party and focus solely on creative. And when you moved back into that, and George and Michelle left for whatever reasons they left, we don't need to get into that. I think Nick Khan was a pretty good choice to continue to elevate that B2B perception, because as a Hollywood agent who had dealt with a ton of brands and a ton of mainstream Hollywood folk, it was a chance to continue to evolve WWE in a positive direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. And I'm kind of curious, because you must be on so many of these earnings calls every quarter.
Yeah.
Like, is there something?
I tried to estimate how many I've been on in my life once.
Well, I can't imagine, but I'm sure
it's in the thousands, multi-thousands. It's crazy.
Like what are certain skill sets that Nick Khan possesses in that role as a front-facing executive that is communicating what can be some very dry information in a way that's digestible? And does he have a unique skill set when you are looking at other kind of executives that are in this role to
This is
convey?
this is what I like about Nick on the earnings call. First of all, he has broad perspective because he's still in the conversation on everything going on in media, and that's very clear. Number one, and number two, he's willing to communicate what he's hearing in a public forum, which is something.
Sometimes.
Yeah, break story, which is something you never see from a C-level executive on an earnings call. So I've definitely appreciated and enjoyed that. And I think it's made WWE's earnings call, even beyond people who are invested in WWE, a little bit of a must listen. And so if you're getting a broader audience, that also helps you to rope in a broader investor base, because inevitably they're also going to be paying attention to the rest of the call. So I think Nick's strategy in that regard, I don't know how much his partners necessarily love it, but I think it's work for the investment community.
Go ahead, John.
Compared, we brought up Fight Pass, and
Yeah.
given how they launched in relatively close proximity to one another, but very different views when it comes to pay-per-view content and the way the network went versus the UFC that has stayed in that business. And that has been, to me, from fans after this merger, the number one concern is WWE going back to a pay model for its largest shows. Are we too far removed that you can put the toothpaste back in when WWE's streaming rights are up with Peacock? How do you see them kind of navigating that streaming space?
My belief is that, yes, we are too far removed at this point, number one. Number two, I think
fans would be relieved to hear
I
that.
think you're going to have now this negotiation around the Raw and SmackDown rights coming up. And as you know, NBCU owns the Raw rights, and they own the rights to those pay-per-views, the old WWE network. My guess is that they might want to, I'm not saying they're gonna, but they might want to add an extension to the pay-per-views deal as part of this negotiation. And optically, I think it probably makes sense for WWE to do it, because my belief is NBCU is happier with the performance of the WWE network content than the actual Raw content. And probably think they underpaid for the network content. So maybe you can, show the street a little bit more of a step up, and then you could get those deals coterminous so that you have the most optionality in the future when those rights are all up.
And those deals are about a year and a half apart,
Yeah, about
I
2
think.
years apart.
Two years apart. It'll expire, I think, 5 years after 2021. So I think March 2026 I think was when the Peacock deal
Yes.
expires.
Yeah. I mean, it's closer to, it's a year and a half. Because that's end of September versus end of March. You're correct.
Are you? It's as we're looking at the overall landscape of major live sports rights. How influential do you feel like the NBA rights are going to play into this when you are hearing the idea of NBC opening? To me, it's like there's such a trickle down to all these other rights. Like that seems to be the big one is the NBA.
The NBA is obviously the biggest rights deal that's outstanding. And you've seen all of the potential partners for WWE on this deal, maybe with the exception of Fox, has expressed interest in the NBA, whether we've heard it firsthand or secondhand, or it's in the media. It sounds like NBCU wants to get one night or day a week, maybe it's a Sunday night situation, to fill out the year when football is over. That makes a lot of sense. So those are going to be expensive rights, obviously. I know that Turner has the rights to AEW. You got to look at them as still like kind of a dark horse for these rights. And
for
then
WWE rights.
Yeah, why not, right? if you watched yesterday, the Max premiere, I don't know if you guys watched that.
I'm aware.
Yeah, they said that sports and news are going to be a big part of this service. They didn't want to give the details now, but what if they abandon the NBA and it makes more sense to do WWE rights because they're less expensive? I don't know.
In
I mean,
that case,
there's so many questions open right now, is what I'm saying. And they all center, as John pointed out, around the NBA rights.
yeah.
Yeah,
And in that case, Turner doesn't, I guess, or WBD doesn't own both WWE and AEW. They would probably let AEW go in that case.
Maybe so, maybe not. Right?
Own
Maybe
both
they want to
wrestling
be the
shows.
home of all things wrestling. I have no idea. I'm not saying that there's a great chance of this. I'm saying that it is a possibility, and there are a number of potential bidders.
And like,
I
how
don't
much,
know the exact appetite of each of the bidders. And you have to take, obviously, the digitals seriously. Amazon, Apple, YouTube, obviously, is doing sports rights now. They started with the NFL.
And so, like, how much do you think? I mean, for wrestling, those deals will probably be done before NBA gets done, right? Because NBA is 2025. These wrestling deals are both 2024. So, how much does our networks like setting aside money because they have to? Wow, we probably really have to spend on NBA. So maybe we spend less on wrestling, or is that just not that big of a factor when considering the
No,
values for wrestling?
There have been ongoing talks for NBA rights already. I mean, we just had NBA All-Star Weekend in February. If you looked around, you saw executives from every media company there. Bob Iger was there. He spoke at the NBA Tech Summit. You have to imagine that these rights negotiations are already really ongoing, and that these companies are probably have a decent idea of what it's going to take and the way that the NBA wants to slice and dice these packages. And I don't know if you listen to the last Fox earnings call. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but Lachlan Murdoch, when he was asked about WWE content, said, well, it depends on how other sports content goes.
Right.
Now, they're not, and I don't believe they're bidding necessarily for the NBA, as I indicated earlier, but what is that other rights? Is it NASCAR? Is it NBA? So I think that the NBA,
And SEC is the college property that's ongoing.
that's correct, which is, the biggest. So
Maybe it's also earmarking for any potential fallout from the Dominion voting scandal. Maybe that's worked into their ongoing coverage.
it's hilarious.
On the side of whether it's the NBA rights, the WWE rights, like what's your kind of guess in terms of like term that these broadcasters are looking for? Are they looking for 10-year deals, so we're not sitting back in 5 years to renegotiate, or would we be looking at sort of keep it to WWE, like it's like 5 years a reasonable term that we're probably looking at?
My guess is that WWE is probably going to want to do another 5-year deal. NBA is interesting. Obviously, you saw the NFL do a much longer term deal than they had in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if the NBA, if given the flexibility with all its partners vis-a-vis digital, did a longer term deal.
And let's just thinking long term and about the market in general. There's a lot of talk about how streaming is not producing the profits that linear TV did, and maybe if can these live sports rights values grow indefinitely as they have. We've heard people predict the plateauing and the fall of live sports rights fees for years and years. But is streaming the problem with streaming not being as profitable, at least at this point, or not profitable at all unless you're Netflix, as traditional TV? Is that something that's going to finally plateau these live sports fees?
Oh, there's a very good chance of that, right? Because the thing, I mean, if you have to look back at the history of sports rights, and media to really understand why sports rights got as expensive as they did. And that had a lot to do with the affiliate fees tied to the bundle, which you could keep jacking because everybody subscribed to the bundle. And you would lose a lot of subscribers if you didn't have certain content. And so that kind of continued as affiliate fees kept going up. It continued the escalation of sports rights values. Then you got to a situation where the audience may not have, from a subscriber standpoint, have been there, but it was the only thing that was working on linear TV. So linear broadcasters, networks had to have that content. Otherwise, they had nothing. Now, as they transitioned to streaming, at the beginning of streaming, they were loss leading. But as everything really moves to streaming over time, that loss leading is going to have to go away. And you're in a new model fully, which is much less profitable and much harder to keep the, scale of subscribers on at all times. So my guess is that at some point, sports rights get to the other side of the curve. I don't know when that's going to be, though. And none of us do.
We haven't spoken a whole lot about the UFC side of the equation
Sure.
of this merger. They were extremely valuable to Endeavor throughout the pandemic. They never shut down. It has been record year after record year. And
they were most valuable to Endeavor in getting them public, right? That would not have been a public company if they didn't do that UFC deal. They could never have gotten it public.
So what is, if you're the UFC side and thinking selfishly, what are they getting out of this merger? And there's inevitably going to be layoffs, I would say, on both sides that you're always going to see in these kinds of deals. Like, how are you looking at it from the UFC side?
Yeah, cost rationalization, as you pointed out. And unfortunately, the inevitable part of cost rationalization is body rationalization. Then you have to look at and think, what does WWE do better than UFC that UFC can learn from? One thing that Nick has really pointed out to me is on CP, on consumer products. There's a much bigger consumer products presence with WWE, and I think that comes naturally with the storylines attached to it. That's why you have action figures and more successful video games, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're going to try and extract some of that DNA from WWE. I think the cross-promotion opportunities are there. Can WWE promote UFC fights to its audience? Can they bring in fighters from UFC? Maybe not necessarily into storylines, but try and elevate them to a wider audience. Possible.
Do you think that
I don't know.
The cross promotion of W and UFC, is that a risk for UFC's brand? Because UFC is legit
interesting.
Fights.
Yeah,
WWE's
totally.
Worked matches. Does the UFC fan, especially those who aren't as well acquainted, start to think, wait a minute, there's pro wrestlers on this UFC show hanging out? Like, does that mean maybe?
I don't think it would go that way. I don't think you'd bring pro wrestlers to UFC. I'm more talking about bringing UFC fighters onto WWE.
I just mean if there's a presence, even cage side, a lot. There already is, but
Yep. I mean, look, you have Brock and Ronda Rousey. There has been some crossover, obviously, in the past. I'm not saying that they become full characters, but they could get worked in a little bit, probably. Yeah, you tell me. You guys are much more attuned to the creative, and I know that you're fans of
John's the MMA journalist.
All right, let's go, John.
Well, I think that
I don't want to make claims when I'm not the expert in the area.
I feel there's enough of a maturation of the audience that sort of in this day and age understand the differences between the two. But I certainly believe like there will be resistance if they feel like they are being force-fed WWE content. And to a degree, you might get some of that on the wrestling side. But from my sense, Brandon, is that the wrestling audience is, I think, more open to the idea of a Conor McGregor coming on to promote his upcoming fight, do some angle on Raw to promote the event. Whereas I do feel like the MMA audience is going to have some more resistance to pro wrestling promotion within
Agree.
the body of the
Agree.
UFC.
That's why I think it's a kind of a one-way thing, and that's why it's beneficial to UFC, and not necessarily to WWE.
Yeah, like I think
Right?
promoting UFC on WWE programming is fine. But
Yeah,
what if
that's
like
what I was saying.
every UFC show had let's say every UFC show has a promo for the next PLE with WWE. I feel like that's, if I'm Dana White, I'm starting to feel like, well, I don't know if I want
Yeah, I
this
agree
thing
with
that's
you.
kind of a sport but not really a sport to be reflecting and questioning maybe the integrity of how real my sport is, especially, and John knows about the gambling issue that they had there and with related to UFC and all that.
Which was a major issue for them to navigate when there were, up here in Canada, like taking, like you could not bet on UFC for a period and on like several outlets for that concern. I'm certain that they don't
briefly,
want to.
just what was the story behind that?
Well, essentially what you had was there was this extreme line movement going into a fight that certainly raised eyebrows. And you had this fighter, James Krause, that was making a killing off of gambling advice, but he's also like a very well-renowned trainer that has a lot of information, and that was being conveyed. And suddenly you saw all of these line movements involving fighters that were attached to him, at least this one fight that had the big line movement. And that was enough to spook a lot of gambling outlets and pulling UFC gambling from several areas. Like New Jersey was looking into this, Ontario was looking into this, and it was something like UFC has a massive deal with DraftKings, and they like gambling is a huge part of the presentation on UFC and for their revenue, and they do not want to be getting into any major
and they probably see
federal
it as a big part of their
investigations.
future, too.
I don't think I could agree with you guys more. This is a one-way promotion opportunity, likely. I mean, you get into the gambling side of it right before this deal was announced, and you had WWE news broke that they were looking into the possibility of betting on WWE matches, and the argument there is, well, people bet on the Oscars and other thing where I don't know why the Oscars aren't really scripted per se.
They're predetermined,
with predetermined outcomes before they're aired. Yes.
An interesting issue on the UFC side that is not something WWE has to contend with is the fact that coming out of the pandemic, one of the big talking points from Dana White is that we're not interested in politics. You tune in here, it's a break. But UFC became very politicized during this time, and Dana White's stance against COVID when he was running, when others weren't. And this past Saturday, if you watch their pay-per-view, here they are in Florida. You have Donald Trump in the front row. You have Jorge Masvidal shouting out Trump and Ron DeSantis. And it's, as we're going into the next election cycle, like UFC, like there is a very significant like right-wing leaning that extends into the programming. And that is something WWE is not. Like it's a very apolitical program that is not going to touch any of those. And MMA, like from the fighters, like there is certainly that element that they pretty much get a live microphone, and there are a lot of politics embedded into MMA when you sort of look under the rock of the people that populate the sport.
Totally. Let's not forget though that Vince McMahon's politics, I think, are very much aligned with those of Dana White's.
Well, that is, yes.
Yeah.
Free from the programming, but yes, it's another.
Yes, but free from the programming. Look, as you guys have pointed out continuously, one is scripted and one isn't. One is trying to have much broader family appeal than the other. It doesn't mean that there aren't some cross-promotion opportunities, but I think, as I said at the beginning of this, these are going to largely be run as separate entities. And when there are opportunities to cherry pick some things or get help from the other, they will lean into that. But there's not going to be a serious integration of these two businesses.
As we wind down here, this has been a fantastic discussion. As we are going into the WWE's earnings call, which is announced for May the 3rd. This is it seems every quarter it's always great anticipation of these earnings calls, but this one especially so given the recent news. And would you expect Vince McMahon's involvement on this earnings call, or is this still going to be kind of Nick Khan?
No, I think this is going to be the Nick show. I actually didn't see that it's May 3rd. I have a daughter due on May 3rd. So,
oh dear, congratulations!
Thanks. I hope I can make that earnings call.
It's in the morning for now.
All right. You guys got me a little worried. Hopefully, little baby will hold off for a couple of days because I'm really looking forward to that earnings call.
Yeah, currently scheduled for 8:30 a.m., which I'm guaranteeing, Brandon, that it'll get moved to 5 p.m.
Oh, of course. It may get moved to May 10th also. Who knows?
That's true. We see all moves here.
Yeah, I think it's more likely than last time that Vince, because Vince had already come back. It was February, but I think still more likely that he does.
I would be absolutely floored if Vince was on this call. I don't
he
think
clearly doesn't like doing.
If I was running investor relations, and they have a very good investor relations team there, Seth does a great job. I would be, well, I guess not that it matters because Vince is going to do what Vince wants to do, but I'd be shocked if he was on that call.
Just the nostalgia of him coming on and stating, "We've merged with the company. Take it away, Nick." That's it. That's all. That
very good impression, John.
I can't do Brandon Thurston's. Brandon Thurston really has it down pretty solid.
Let's hear it, Brandon. Now you're on the spot. You guys put me on the hot seat for a little while.
We've got a treasure chest of IP and revenue, and take her away, Nick.
You got to be on speakerphone as well to get the muffled Vince connection.
I think you guys were equally as good with your impressions.
Well, Brandon, first of all, congratulations on your expected daughter.
Yeah,
and maybe after, once you are settled in, we would love to have you back on.
Would love it.
This is going to be a major story for months and years to come, I am sure. But I do encourage everyone to go check out the many podcasts that are out there. And Brandon, where could you direct people to hear more of your analysis that goes much beyond just WWE?
Yes, www.lightshedtmt.com and the LightShed Podcast and LightShed Live. Those are kind of our products.
All right. Well, we are going to say goodbye to Brandon, and we will be taking some of your super chats, and Brendan and I will wrap this up. But Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate the time. Hope to do this again.
And by the way, for people watching on video, you notice we had some video issues with Brandon, so we weren't able to get him on the screen. But he was wearing a LightShed 316 shirt. We did see it for a moment before we went on.
That is true.
I'm still waiting for my WrestleNomics 316 shirt and shirts in the mail.
That was a gift, but it's going to be one that I get a lot of wear out of. I'm already planning on wearing it on the LightShed Podcast tomorrow. So, I probably won't wash it tonight, but don't tell anyone.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks a lot for the time, Brandon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. All right, that was Brandon Ross. Dare I say, Brandon, I think he did come away just loving our impressions, and that was a fun chat.
Yeah, it was excellent. Great stuff.
I continually go back to, like, in looking at all of these, like, media rights and how the NBA, like, obviously that's a major one out there, but the potential effect, if you're talking about NBC getting back into the NBA business, and the idea that if there are games available, that some of them could seep down onto the USA Network. And it goes without saying the Warner Brothers Discovery talks with the NBA and the direct impact that will have on its AEW negotiations. But it'll be interesting, as you mentioned in the interview, the idea of when they go into these talks of knowing in the future they have to have this available money available for their NBA rights, which they are looking for a massive increase, just mind-blowing money that they are expecting here.
Yeah, the NBA is already getting $2.6 billion
per year.
Per year. Yeah. Am I able to share this on the screen? I think I am. If I put I don't know, maybe not. But anyway, they're getting 2.6 billion. They were just under $1 billion in the there it is, in the round before that. So I haven't. It's probably out there, but I haven't heard. Were they looking for a 3x increase? I think maybe I saw one article say they were looking for. I mean,
I'd have to look it up, but it was like over the term. I want to say like 72 billion over the life of the deal, like a gigantic increase over what they're getting now. And
I mean, to compare AEW, which we have on the screen here, way down at the end, 44 million. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to NBA's current deal. Much less when they get an upgrade, assuming they will get an upgrade. So I don't know. I guess,
and comes at a time as they are just expanding the hours of AEW programming. Like we've got, we just finished week 3 of All Access. It is, there's the rumored Saturday show. We just saw a 2-hour block on Friday that, to me, overperformed greatly of what I expected going into last Friday. So it seems like it's a key part of their programming. And to this chart, even with a multiple increase, it is a very small amount, but it's also Warner Brothers Discovery. Like, how much available do they have? It would seem to me to like AEW is certainly within their means to give not just a notable increase, but to be able to retain, unless we get Warner Brothers Discovery aggressively going after WWE rights, as was thrown out there. Which Brandon is not the first one who has thrown that idea out about the idea of the multiple benefits of WWE being in talks with Warner Brothers Discovery.
We'll see if that ends up on the aggregators later. Analyst says WBD could buy WWE and get rid of AEW. But I think I'm not as bullish on AEW rights as I was on the podcast episode where we sort of broke down the math and justified how you can make a 3x increase or 5x increase even. I don't the atmosphere has cooled off. I mean, since that day that Netflix reported that they didn't grow in subscribers sequentially from the prior quarter, things have really cooled in terms of content spending. And then the economy has had issues more broadly too. But I think there's probably an understanding among the executives about how much they're going to bid, probably more so. I mean, certainly more so than we do, just trying to sit around and predict it. I feel like these media executives kind of know what the other media executives are going to bid. They're not completely going in blind and bidding blind. So I think there's a good chance that AEW is partly in a small stake is owned by WBD. So there's that incentive. Why would you sort of ditch your current wrestling product if you do own a stake in it? So I think AEW will probably get a raise, and I do think that W will get a raise, assuming their content doesn't fall apart and Vince McMahon takes over. But even if it does, I don't see Raw and SmackDown falling in the ranks. And in fact, the last 2 episodes they did quite well.
Given the various options that are out there for AEW, do you have any strong leaning on what you would do with this Wembley Stadium show in terms of broadcast?
I think that's going to end up on Max.
Yeah.
Which we alluded to and Brandon alluded to in the interview, is the combined Discovery Plus and HBO Max. Even though Discovery Plus is still going to be a standalone streaming service that you can buy by itself.
Yeah, but this is very confusing for me as a Canadian without access to Max. Right. But piecing it together. Service. Yeah, we have Crave up here that gets the HBO programming. So
Succession, thank God.
That is it. Succession. Yeah, this was no
spoilers.
Did you watch Sunday Night
I
Live?
Did. I had to avoid so many spoilers, but I have watched the most recent episode the other night.
Yeah, a tremendous episode of television. But if we go any further, we will get massacred. Let's go to just one question here from Ryan Archer, who asks, do you think that WWE will move PLEs back to Sunday and or have weekends with UFC on Saturday, WWE on Sundays? What do you think about the pairing of these shows? The move to Saturday seems to have been a very strong move by WWE.
Yeah, I think we discussed the Saturday. Is Saturday better than Sunday? I don't know, because there's other things involved certainly with Peacock, with how they report. Our WrestleMania, our Royal Rumble was so many, double digits of percent more highly viewed. Well, that's got to be largely due to the fact that Peacock has millions of more subscribers in this year versus last year. But I'm sure we won't be seeing UFC and WWE on the same night, the same weekend.
Which is an example we have coming up.
Do we even see that lately? Have there been UFCs and PLEs on the same night?
It's been very rare, but May 6th, there is a UFC pay-per-view the same night as the Puerto Rico show, Backlash.
Yeah.
I could imagine those being pretty rare. Like, you're not going to avoid fight nights, but that to me is not a big issue. But a big pay-per-view on a WWE night, I think those are nights you want to avoid. We are going to get SummerSlam versus Nate Diaz and Jake Paul on DAZN pay-per-view coming up in August as well.
That's the same day as SummerSlam.
Correct. Yes, they will be.
But
we'll
that's
probably
not a
have
UFC fight. That's a
no.
boxing.
This is a DAZN pay-per-view, but we will have the Paul brothers probably on opposite cards that particular evening.
Yeah.
My last question: as you have had time to digest the TKO letters that we expect this to be, do you have any sense on what the name of this company is going to be? Because I have a theory.
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine TKO will be the initialism, but I don't know.
Because you keep hearing the word blockbuster. So that is my prediction, is that we're going to blockbuster somehow. Vince has used blockbuster multiple times, and I know Vince is not someone to just use a word multiple times for no reason. So that's my theory, that blockbuster is somehow tied into this idea for a name of a company.
That's a B. We've got TK and O as the letters.
Yeah, I know it's foreign, but TKO is a very lame name for the entire company.
It's going to resurrect the media brand, Blockbuster.
All right, it's a knockout. Okay, well, again, a big thank you to
we could just add one more thing. I think we could see this TKO company maybe even include boxing in the future. If this goes so well for them, why not go for the next pillar, if you will, of combat sports?
It's something that, I mean, Dana White has talked about the idea of Zuffa boxing. He going back years, and that kind of went away, and of late it's resurrected itself. And if we remember, one of Nick Khan's interviews not all that long ago was throwing out the idea of boxing. Yeah. So that to me would be a logical extension. We even saw some boxers on the pre-show for WrestleMania. It seems like that would be something that would make a whole lot of sense for them. That is a very difficult industry to navigate, where you are talking about government oversight and being with fighters that do have a protection with the Ali Act, which is very different from UFC and WWE and its freedoms. But would not surprise me either that they look.
And they have this connection, at least with Logan Paul. And Logan Paul has done boxing. Is he the one who fought Mayweather?
Yes,
Logan. And so they have that connection there. And there's something interesting happening, at least economically, with these boxing fights between these influencer celebrities, and that sounds very WWE to me.
Yeah, and also a way that you could kind of take your UFC fighters and put them into a boxing space. Like, there is the opportunity for something there, but we will see. Will Power Slap find its way under the TKO banner?
I don't know. Is there going to be a season 2 of Power Slap?
It's going to be on Rumble. As we talk about the right-wing leaning politics of Dana White.
Is there still the pay-per-view is what you're talking about, right? Or is it just going to be, they're going to do another season that's on Rumble?
Well, the pay-per-view ended up being moved onto this free Rumble service, which this this finale came and went, and I heard nothing about it. But season 2 is supposed to be on Rumble, and they're going to film this in Abu Dhabi.
Okay.
So that is the plan. No more TBS.
Maybe we should be streaming on Rumble.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of audience we'd find on Rumble. As people can alert us to how we would fare under Rumble. Maybe that's anyway. We will wrap things up. Brandon is going to be back later tonight. The how did you feel Brandon Week is going here on Post Wrestling? Have you heard? Because we've got Brandon from New Jersey joining the Postmarts on Saturday, and it was very tough for me. I felt silly calling him Brandon Ross and Brandon Thurston. You could tell there were a few there where I was actually, one time I went to address you and got his answer. It's tough to navigate when you got double Brandons here.
Well, this is the wisdom of Vince McMahon. You can't have people with the same first name.
Vince McMahon proven right, clearly. So we weren't going to rename you, though, for the purposes of this show, as Gregory Thurston. But what's coming up tonight?
The Dynamite rating will be coming out in about a half an hour, and we'll have whatever reaction there is to that. And I don't know. I'll have to look. Usually what I do is I look at my Twitter feed. So whatever I've been tweeting about is good chance what I'll talk about. Whatever I've tweeted about between Sunday and Thursday will be the material for the show. So maybe a Ric Flair travel map.
How? That's what I want to know. How did you do that? Dude, your work always impresses me. But when I saw this, you are literally one of one that could create this. go to Brandon's Twitter. I can't even put it into words what he was able to develop and how. I would love to watch the making of.
I'll try to make it brief. So it's based on Cage Match data. You know, the credit for the data goes to Cage Match, of course. So I isolated. You know, I filtered out all of Ric Flair's matches, and I have a column that's the location, which just comes from the database, and I used a library in Python to say, okay, here's the location name. Give me the longitude and latitude. And so I had to do all that, and then you kind of got to organize in just the right way for this thing called Flourish to put it into the map, and it takes a lot of time, but that's basically how I did it.
It was very impressive. I think like that. I'm just watching this thing. It's like I would just sit down and watch this for 40 years worth of Ric Flair's travels around the world. So go check that out. WrestleNomics. The WrestleNomics 30 will be up tonight. Patreon.com/WrestleNomics. You can also check out postwrestlingcafe.com and
Highly recommended.
Stay tuned for our next in our interview series. Brandon and I will have to consult the spreadsheet, and we will be.
I added a bunch of names too.
Okay, we'll definitely have some forthcoming interviews coming your way. So thanks to everyone that joined us live. These are very fun to do, and that is it for us.